Preston, Washington's Governor Jay Inslee did tell me late this afternoon that he believes that further executive action on this issue in Washington state is not needed, and he does not believe he has the authority to offer any sort of declaration about what local cities should do when cleaning up homelessness encampments. But two candidates to be the next governor say they would follow Gavin Newsom's lead. California's Governor Gavin Newsom makes a headline-grabbing directive.
Executive order to move the process forward. We're done.
The Democrat telling cities to start clearing out homeless encampments after the recent Supreme Court grants past decision.
It is a good idea. It's way overdue.
Washington Republican gubernatorial candidate Dave Reichert says he'd do the same thing. You don't think there's a downside?
No, I don't think there's only an upside to making progress in the homeless situation. We get people off drugs. We get them the mental health that they need.
This is a sign that, yes, the tides are shifting, and it's very clear.
Democratic gubernatorial candidate Mark Mullet also welcomes the idea. You would be in favor of doing something like this if you're elected?
I would, 100%. I mean, the status quo is not working. That's the entire reason why I'm running for governor, is a frustration with the status quo.
Yet regional social service providers say it would be a mistake. The KCRHA says housing solves homelessness. And Seattle U professor and Homeless Rights Advocacy Project director Sarah Rankin says the only thing that changed after the court's decision is that cities can now jail or fine someone who is involuntarily homeless. And Newsom's move strikes me as political posturing. They're saying this is the wrong approach. This isn't going to work.
I think those are the same groups that got us into the situation we're in now.
What about the argument, though, you're just playing whack-a-mole if you're going to sweep up these encampments without a viable solution for housing?
Look, that's what's been happening anyway, right? I think Governor Inslee had a Clear the Freeway project, and all of those 10 cities are right back where they were just 2 months ago.
Republican gubernatorial candidate Semi Bird told me today that this is not what he would do if he was elected, calling Newsom's move a, quote, strategic mistake. Democratic gubernatorial candidate Bob Ferguson also said in part that encampments can be cleared while simultaneously treating people with dignity. That's the story for now. Live in Seattle, I'm Chris Daniels, KOMO News.
Well, we know how big of an issue homelessness is in Washington and in many other cities and states across the country. But California Governor Gavin Newsom just issued a statewide order to clear homeless encampments there. Molly Shin joins us tonight on the Deep End. Molly, is there a chance we might see something similar here in Washington?
Well, Preston, it's a good question that a lot of people are asking today. Homelessness is, of course, a top issue that voters want to see addressed. Tonight, I talked to Chris Daniels about how Washington's gubernatorial candidates say they would tackle the homelessness crisis. Chris, thanks for joining us here on ARC Seattle tonight. I want to have you start just by telling me about this executive order in California. What is it that Governor Gavin Newsom has issued?
Well, Molly, you know that California has been dealing with similar challenges that Washington State has over the last several years. In fact, even more unhoused homeless encampments in California. And he said today, California has spent $1 billion on this crisis and allocated that money for local cities. And after this recent Supreme Court decision, there is no more excuses, in his words, no more excuses. He has issued an order for cities to start cleaning up these homeless encampments, tens of thousands of people in California. And it's really a sweeping change, especially from that state, where we know here in Washington State that policy has continued to follow what is going on in California, meaning over the last several years, we've seen Washington Governor Jay Inslee seem to follow California Governor Gavin Newsom. So there's an immediate question on how far Washington is behind what California's done. But this is really a major policy shift regarding homelessness in the state of California.
Right. To your point, I think a lot of people expect, if California is doing it, that is something that will end up happening here. So I know you were reaching out to some lawmakers here and gubernatorial candidates today to get their opinions on it. What have you learned?
Well, I can tell you up front that Washington Governor Jay Inslee doesn't appear to be following Newsom anytime soon. In fact, I have a statement from his office in front of me that says that Inslee's directive to resolve encampments is already in action, and that further executive action does not appear necessary, according to his office, because the governor has already directed state agencies to resolve encampments. There's also a question, at least according to Governor Jay Inslee's office, about whether he has the authority to order cities like Newsom did to take specific actions on encampments. But his office, again, is saying he has used his bully pulpit. So then there's a question about the governor's race, the candidates that are trying to run now to replace Inslee. And I did hear back from the four that have raised the most money, meaning Republican Dave Reichert, Republican Semi Bird, Democrat Mark Mullet, and Democrat Bob Ferguson. Interestingly enough, both Mullet and Reichert said they would do exactly what Newsom just did, that they would, if they were elected, the one Democrat, the other a Republican, both said that they believed what Newsom is doing is a good idea and that Washington should not maintain status quo. Semi Bird, on the other hand, said he wouldn't do what Newsom just did and called it a strategic mistake, and that he has a plan to resolve the homelessness crisis that does not look like what Gavin Newsom just ordered. And then Bob Ferguson, who's the sitting attorney general, as you know, didn't make a policy declaration one way or the other, but believed that people should still be treated with dignity. So you and I both know homelessness is a top priority for voters in Washington state. This now adds another layer to that discussion, and we have already heard from social service providers that they think this was just a purely political move by Gavin Newsom. We also heard from former President Donald Trump, who said that he believed this was a political move from Newsom as the presidential campaign season ramps up here in the last 100 or so days before the presidential election. So there's a lot of politics at play, but at least with the candidates running for governor in Washington state, the two that I spoke with directly today on both sides of the political fence believe that Newsom made the right move in issuing this order today.
Interesting. Well, we'll certainly hear more about it as we move up towards the primary and the general election. Thanks for the insight on this today, Chris.
You bet.
Well, Molly, I guess we'll have to wait and see if a similar order comes down here in Washington. But in the meantime, what will this look like in California?
Well, Preston, California is home to roughly a third of the nation's homeless population, with thousands of tents across the state. So this is clearly a very big job. Newsom's order directs state agencies, including the Department of Transportation and state parks, to first clear the encampments that pose safety risks. They're supposed to give reasonable advance notice before a camp is cleared, and they must offer to connect encampment residents to their local services.
Interesting. Thank you, Molly.